Howdy everybody. So welcome to another In Conversation with our TB Taskmasters. Ooh. So we've got Laura Cleghorn and we've got Paul Wyatt from the Welcome Centre. So before we begin with introductions from them, I'll introduce myself. My name is Lauren Webster. I'm female, white, blonde hair, currently tied up in a ponytail, and my pronouns are she and her. Nailed it. Yes. So let's introduce some of our guests today. So Laura, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Laura Cleghorn. I lead the TB projects here in Dundee. I'm a chemist by training and I've been a medicinal chemist for a number of years. I am female and brunette, just to please Lauren and Ali.
Thanks for that. And Paul, let's have an introduction from yourself.
I am Paul Wyatt. I'm head of the Drug Discovery Unit. I'm also director of the Wellcome Centre for Anti-Infectives Research. I'm a medicinal chemist by training as well. I've been in Dundee for 15 and a half years, and before that I worked in the biopharma industry, big companies, small companies, for about 23 years. I am a white male with rather white hair now.
That's cool. No, thanks very much for that. So everybody, I was going to say this In Conversation with, yes, we are speaking to our guests, but we are also doing some fun interactive things at the same time. And we also want to hear an awful lot from you guys, not just from Laura and Paul. Sorry guys, but it's true. So what we're going to do is we're going to ask you if you could please log on to menti.com. So you're about to see on your screen a link. And in that link, it also has a code. So you're going to need your mobile phones for this. And we are going to log on to menti.com. Ali's going to bring it onto our screen. And we've got some questions for you. Some things that we would like you to participate in to try and steer the conversation in areas that you want to hear of, not just what Paul and Laura want to discuss. So, I was going to say, our first question here. So, we would like you to give us 3 words that you think of when you hear about TB. So what to do is, by typing into your phone, menti.com, and your code link for the room is 388607771. So while we get everything kick-started, I was going to say Laura and Paul aren't allowed on their phone. So I'm going to ask them. They're only maybe allowed 1 word each. So Laura, Paul? One word that you think of when you hear about TB.
Hard. Challenging.
Yeah. Paul?
Terrible.
Okay. I don't know what I think of. Yeah. Lungs. That could be one that I think of when I hear about TB. Lungs. Yeah, we've obviously got a chemist in the background as well, saying about a quinone as well. We can discuss that shortly. We've got some people focusing in on the actual symptoms. So I was going to say we've got Laura and Paul. You can see that we've got it's painful, hard. Okay, Laura, someone else agrees with you. Good show. Tough, struggle. A lot of this is really reflecting on the difficulties. Difficult is also a word that's coming in there as well.
Switzerland, that's random.
A lot of people before TB drugs used to go to Switzerland to those sanatoriums.
That makes a lot more sense.
Dry air, or it's dry air. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. That's an interesting fact. I didn't know that. It's quite good. Whoever's
Not
in the
I just made it up.
You just made it up. Excellent.
No.
Yeah, don't tell them you made stuff up.
I mean, long treatments, that's a good point. That's a key point about TB, isn't it? That's one of the... It's so hard to treat. People have to be treated for, months, and that then leads to resistance, which is another word that's come up.
MDR. So I was going to say, somebody want to enlighten the audience, well, the rest of the audience, what does MDR mean?
So that's multi-drug resistant TB. So much like we hear about antibiotic resistance, when we're prescribed antibiotics in this country, the more people are treated, resistance starts to emerge, and there's also extensively drug-resistant TB, emerging. So patients with that can't be treated with the standard frontline therapies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I like as well how there's also third world being written in there. Any of you guys got a thought on that?
I mean, I wonder if this is more a disease of maybe regions that live in poverty, is the comment. I wonder if that's where that's come from. Many people probably know that TB for a long time was an issue in this country, and it's not so much of an issue. Like often when I tell people that I work on TB, they say, "Why are you working on TB? That's cured." And then I have to say, I mean, I'm not sure people realise the disease burden there is. 1.5 million people die a year of TB. Before COVID, it was the leading killer by an infectious agent. 10 million people, it's estimated, are infected each year. So in this country, it's thought that there were improvements in nutrition and housing, and we cured TB. There were also treatments, but a lot of areas with a high incidence of TB, people tend to live in quite close communities, maybe families all living in the same place, so the disease is easily spread.
So I was going to say the comment that a fellow attendee has made about a third world, it's not just related to or found in third world countries.
I mean, obviously there are areas of the world that have a very high disease incidence, but I mean, anyone can get TB. I think I read 7,000 people had it in London last year. So, if you go to an area with TB, anyone can catch it. It's much like COVID. So I'm sure most people on the call know it's spread through air droplets. If you breathe the infected air droplets, then you can catch TB. So no, it's not just in those regions. I think Public Health England were trying to reduce the amount of TB in this country, but it's not high. It is there, but it's not non-existent.
So I think just before we start getting on to a little bit more technical detail, let's maybe hear from you guys of what is TB. So we've got a lot of answers coming in here on the word cloud. There's an awful lot of the clinical side of it. There's somebody, a chemist definitely in the background, saying about a quinone. But could you just explain to us very lay terms of TB? What is TB? What does it do? How does it spread? And why do we care? So that's for both Laura, Paul, both of you.
I mean, I could start, Paul, if you're happy with that.
Yeah, please start.
I mean, TB is caused by a bacteria, Mycobacterium tuberculosis. It's actually thought it's co-evolved with the host, and we are the host of Mycobacterium tuberculosis, and it's believed to be around for a very long time. I think there was an early settlement 9,000 years ago. They saw evidence of TB in the skeletal remains. So as I've said, it's spread by people who are sick, coughing and sneezing, a lot like COVID. It's not thought you can catch it by contact, and so it tends to affect the lungs. So people initially would get a cough, and then it starts to form these sort of granulomas. And then if the TB escapes, it can then spread to other parts of the body. So it is treatable. There are drugs out there, but there was a big gap in development of drugs between sort of the 60s and the 90s, and people started to realise as resistance emerged, there was a need for new treatments coming out there. I think I said at the start, it can take up to 6 months to treat people, and then if they don't continue that course of treatment, that's when the resistance also comes in. And we're not talking about one pill a day, we're talking about multiple pills every day, and I think that's really hard for people, especially depending on what access they have to healthcare facilities.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's really good.
TB's been around for a very long time, because I think people have seen signs of TB in the bones of dinosaurs. And so, as Laura says, it's mainly seen as an infection of the lungs, but you can get TB in bones, and you can get TB in the brain, I think, and that causes more problems. Yeah, it's a terrible disease, and we don't have the lovely pictures that we get shown in some of the presentations. But what the body does is to try and contain the infection. It creates these a lot of the kind of body's immune cells kind of tries to encapsulate the TB, and you can get these very large lesions in the lungs that are filled up with stuff that one of the experts describes as being like cottage cheese in the lungs, and these things become very, very large. And even with the drugs we have, as Laura was saying, a minimum than 6 months. The multi-drug resistance TB is kind of 24 months with drugs that are very toxic and actually can cause very serious health issues themselves. But even with those drugs, sometimes the treatment is to actually start to remove parts of people's lungs to take out these areas of really bad damage, but also high levels of bacteria. And as somebody said, put in there Switzerland, because that was a classic thing, that if people got TB in the past, there weren't really the drugs to treat them. They would have to go to a sanatorium in an area with very kind of clear, dry air to help them breathe. But actually, a very high percentage of the world's population is infected with TB. They just don't show active disease because the immune system for a lot of people can contain the disease.
Yeah, it's thought 25% of the world's population are infected, which is huge, isn't it? But then only 5 to 15% actually get it. So
yeah, that's a scary number as well, especially when the building of resistance as well. Very scary.
And it was interesting that people didn't put HIV down as one of the items, because I have an article here and saying that about 200,000 out of the 680,000 people who die of HIV a year die because of a TB infection.
Yeah, scary number. Scary. So on that cheery note, I was going to say, let's go back to the audience. So let's start asking the audience some other questions for them to, before we continue on our journey. It's nice to hear what they think. So audience, again, with your mentee, I was going to say, using the same room code if you haven't already logged in. If not, you should just go to the next slide for you. So another thing that we're interested to hear about is, how big a challenge do you think each of these diseases are? So we've got COVID, we've got malaria, and we've also got TB. Now, on a scale, how challenging do you think they are? So we've heard an awful lot in the news, obviously about COVID. If you haven't, please do read the news. But yeah, it's just interesting to hear your thoughts on challenges. And this is what, Laura, Paul will be asking you just shortly about, what it is that the CAIR does and our involvement and what it is that we're actually trying to combat. So looking at it, really interesting. I was going to say, we've got COVID slightly further behind than malaria and TB. So I was going to say, Laura, do you want to comment on the challenges? I mean, you're working on TB. I was going to say, we've got knowledge in the building of malaria and COVID for some of the projects we work on here. Any thoughts on that?
I think you're asking quite a hard question here, because each one of them has its own specific challenges, doesn't it? And I'm not sure how the audience are measuring that, maybe by personal preference. I mean, TB does have huge challenges. I mean, maybe people with COVID, we've seen there have been breakthroughs in vaccines for COVID, and in the past week, small molecules as well. And I think a vaccine for TB would be a massive game changer. And that's something we don't have. There are, I think, 14 vaccines under investigation for TB. So, I mean, I think you've asked a hard question, Lauren. Paul, what's your thoughts?
I think in terms of, they all have their massive challenges. TB we need to give multiple drugs to get good efficacy or even reasonable efficacy, but also to try and reduce the onset of resistance, and that is increasing, unfortunately. And actually just trying to come up with one drug for TB is very, very difficult, and there's a lot of work going into it. So we do need a lot of TB drug discovery work, because 1 in 6 that goes into clinical development at maximum is going to survive. So if you want a 3 or 4 drug combination, you're talking about 18 to 24 drugs going into clinical trials to come up with that combination. It's a tough disease. You're having to get compounds to the bacteria, and quite often the bacteria are not growing to try and stop themselves being cleared by the immune system or by drugs. Malaria, again, has big challenges, because even again, compounds are given in combinations, but resistance occurs to drugs in those combinations on a regular basis, and I think malaria drugs only have about a 10-year survival rate. They have to be swapped out. COVID obviously is a massive problem because it's spread around the world so badly, and it's not a seasonal disease such as flu, and it's not going to go away easily. So I think we do have to have a broad range of options for treatment, and people have done a lot of screening of known drugs and other compounds against COVID growing in sort of cell culture, and the hit rates are very, very low. So even though a few drugs have appeared quite recently as looking very promising, it's going to be a real problem to tackle, and it's a problem that's not just going to go away naturally. I think we're going to have vaccination, antibodies, and drugs to suppress it. So they're all a big problem, and COVID has killed somewhere between 5 and 23 million people on the estimates I've seen. So it is a major, major problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with both of you. I mean, it's really hard to categorize them into which one is the most challenging. So audience, I mean, by the looks of your responses as well, you also do agree. I mean, it's very much a tie on these ones. So we've got another question for you as well. So where in the world do you think TB is a big problem? So we've talked about, Laura had mentioned about in poverty-stricken areas, but it's not just, like somebody had mentioned in the word cloud about a third world country, it's not just isolated there. So we're interested for you to type in your answers of what you think, where in the world you think TB would be a big problem. So we've got here that's coming through already, we've got the likes of China, India and Russia. I was going to say, Laura, thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good answer, developing world. I mean, the one that always surprises me, and I don't see it, maybe it'll come through, is the Philippines and Indonesia. I think they have quite a high incidence of that. And again, it's people, oh yeah, Indonesia has come up.
You beat them to it, Laura, you beat them to it.
Yeah, no, I just, there's a lot across Africa as well. So, and India, again, I think had 2 million cases in the 2018, which is huge.
Did I not read somewhere that 45% of the reported cases are in Southeast Asia?
Yeah, there's a big incidence in Southeast Asia. I was just going to mention that. So people kind of touched on it with Indonesia, but kind of Vietnam and Cambodia and places like that. Yeah, there's a big incidence there.
Yeah, I was going to say, I read that on, it was the WHO, so the World Health Organization website for those not familiar with the WHO. So guys, great answers again. I was going to say you've ticked really many boxes on that. So we've got a last, which is a Q&A session for you. So what's going to happen now is that you have the opportunity to ask Laura and Paul anything to do with TB, anything that you would like addressed, answered, or perhaps even involved in a discussion. And I'll do my very best to ask your questions to our guests. So in the meantime, while they are coming through, I was going to say we'll continue on our conversation, and every now and again I was going to say we'll be able to pick up on some of your questions. So Laura, you had mentioned earlier, you had said about, why are you still working on TB? It's cured. And if you actually go into the WHO...
No, that's what people say to me, just to clarify.
Yeah, well, oh yeah. So if you go into the WHO's website, it says there is a cure and it's treatable. So why are you and your team and Paul for the centre, why are you still working on it then?
Well, I think there is still that unmet medical need, but in the number of people dying, the resistance to the frontline therapies, and really what we're trying to do is to develop a drug that targets a different mode of action, because if you keep targeting the same mode of action, then that resistance already exists. So we're trying to get a new drug that will, anything we do would be used in combination with other drugs just to avoid that resistance issue. So yeah, it's trying to find new drugs that may also offer the potential to shorten the length of treatment. So, we've talked a lot about people being treated for 6 months, but then if that could be shortened even to 3 or 4, I think the aim is to get it less than a month, but that is another big aim of ours, to find a new mode of action and a shortened duration of treatment.
So just on that shortened duration of treatment, why is it so long in the first place? Why is it 6 months, maybe even plus of that of treatment?
I think it's the nature of bacteria. You end up with these non-replicating bacteria that are quite hard to clear. So that's why you have to give this cocktail of drugs to make sure you eliminate all the TB from the body. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. It's not a homogeneous disease, even in the same in one individual. So people are now using imaging techniques to see how the TB across the lungs in individuals are responding. And so we say we have these lesions where the TB is existing, and if you treat a person, some will go away and some will carry on growing in the same person. So the same drugs circulating around the body have different effects in different parts of the lungs of the same person. So it is this kind of constant drug pressure on the bacteria to kind of just keep knocking it down over a long period of time gives you a situation. And actually a lot of people who are cured of TB, they don't have the TB completely cleared from their body. What's happened is that the level of TB has been reduced enough that the people's immune system can suppress it to a kind of a dormant, non-clinically obvious state. And so that one, but also, even the 6 months treatment, so it's 4 drugs for 2 months, 2 drugs for the rest, it's not without side effects. And I know myself, I'm pretty rubbish at taking drugs, even though I'm supposed to be coming up to making the things, even trying to
medicines, remember. Everyone, medicines, he means medicines.
Medicines, yes, I mean medicines. But the same thing. But in this case, legal drugs. But remembering to take 2-4 drugs over a 6-month period when you start to feel better, but those drugs are causing you side effects, it means that people are not taking the course. And then obviously the problem, and also the problem is that different people need different lengths of treatment, but we don't have a way of determining whether people are actually cured. So yeah, as Laura says, we need safer drugs, better tolerated drugs that work over a shorter period of time. So people are more likely to take them, but also being in a position where we can identify whether people have TB there and then and start treating them straight away, because one of the big issues of TB spread is that people go in, they get tested, they go away, they have to wait until people have identified whether they actually have active TB. And in that time, they're spreading the disease. So we really need a system where we have very good testing, but also very clean, rapidly acting drugs. So people go in, see a doctor, they get tested, get given the drugs straight away, and to reduce the amount of spread of the disease before people get tested. But also, if people go away, they might not well come back because they think, well, if I do have TB, then I won't be able to go to work, and there is no healthcare system or national health system or kind of unemployment benefit or sickness benefit. So as we've seen in COVID in the UK, people don't want to know they got COVID because they say they can't afford to have it and not go to work.
Yeah, I mean, that's potentially a big problem with COVID and TB, isn't it? That the number of cases that have gone undiagnosed, and we're not going to see that for a number of years. The number of cases have gone down last year, but that's probably because people couldn't get access to healthcare. So,
yeah, fighting a losing battle, that one as well.
Yeah.
So guys, I was going to say, we've got some really good questions. There's a lot of questions coming through. So I'm going to play almost like a little game with you both as well. So I'm going to ask you some of the audience's questions, and let's perhaps maybe, if we can, keep some of the answers a bit shorter, so that, because there's a lot of questions. So I'd love to be able to address what people have asked. So sticking with the medicines part of it, so Paul, you had mentioned about people not wanting to get tested, or if they do, they don't come back. So a question from the audience: how good are the diagnostics for TB? So this is for Laura. Let's have Laura suggest this one. If you do know.
How good are the diagnostics for TB? I think if you can access them, they're good. Is the issue not that people might not be able to access them?
Cool.
Paul, what's your...
Yeah, I think it's the problem of the time to get a result.
Yeah.
And,
so how long does it take? So you've just said the length of the result. How long does that take? Do you know if is it a lengthy process?
I think it's relatively lengthy because TB grows very, very slowly, and actually quite often the test is basically spit, but actually people are going to have significant infection without having TB in their spit. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we've got another question actually here about the BCG. So the BCG jab that many people receive in their teenage years. So someone said, I've had my BCG. Isn't that the vaccine against TB?
No,
yeah.
Well, it depends where you live. In the US, they don't use it because they say it doesn't work. I think, like me, I had mine when I was at school, but I'm sure it doesn't have any effect now. I think the effect wears off quite quickly. So I think it's not a very good vaccine. It's not an answer for it. People have been trying to develop TB vaccines for 40 years or so, and there isn't a good one at the moment. As Laura said, there's lots in development, but that's why we have to keep coming up with drugs, because the chances of coming up with a really good vaccine is slim.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the BCG, I think it's mainly used for children. I think if you live in a disease endemic area, some people still get it, but we stopped mass vaccinating years ago because, as Paul says, there was concerns over how well it really did work. And I think depending where you are in the world, that also dictates how effective it is. I think there's some statistic that the closer you are to the equator, the worse it actually works.
Oh, well, not so good. Somebody else has also asked as well, can you ever be completely free of TB? So you had both mentioned about, once levels of bacteria get below a certain threshold, it's your body's immune system that takes over. But you've also mentioned in the same statement as well that you can get it again. So are you ever completely free of it? Does it stay within inside of you? Do you just get it again, environmental factors? What's your take on that one?
I think, shall I jump in?
I didn't want to answer that one.
So I think it's very difficult to know whether it's reactivation of dormant disease or whether people are getting reinfected in that case. So I suppose if you have dormant disease, it's asymptomatic, then that's where people need to get. I think the understanding of the area is being developed, because of the better imaging techniques that are available, and there are key people doing really groundbreaking work in terms of trying to understand disease in live patients. In the past, people would wait until somebody died and they would cut them up and do an autopsy and look at their lungs and what's in there. But to be able to track disease in live people while they're being treated, and whilst they have the kind of normal medical assessment of them, this is really quite new stuff that's really being developed at the moment. And we're working with people like Cliff Barry, who works in the US and in South Africa, and being able to do imaging of people's lungs and see what's happening. So I think it's an area where we don't really know the real answer.
Yeah, so I was going to say, so Dundee's involvement with TB. So Laura, question for you, being the TB team leader. So why is the work happening at Dundee? Why is it not being done where TB is most prevalent, is most common?
I guess it's the research facilities that they have available to them. And, you have to remember the TB bacteria, we can't work on it in-house because we don't have the facilities. That the risk to human health is too great. You need very specific, lab requirements in order to work on TB. So the access to that and some of the TB disease endemic areas, and I imagine funding as well, is an issue in those areas.
And
it's not just happening in Dundee. You have to remember, we are part of two different consortia, and that means we work with academics and pharmas across the world, all with this common goal to try and help combat TB. So, it really is quite a huge team effort. I was working out, I think we're almost, America, Africa, Asia and Europe working together. So that's quite a global effort.
And we are, so the WCAIR, the Wellcome Centre, we are based in the UK. We're academia. We're based at the University of Dundee. So how engaged is the pharmaceutical industry into combating TB? So we're an academic institute. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, we work with a number of pharma companies who do devote efforts towards TB. I think that is maybe declining a bit over the years. It has moved to more academic research. I mean, Paul, we might want to comment on that. But there are pharmaceutical companies are still interested in, they do have their not-for-profit side for the greater good that they like to invest in.
Yeah, I suppose I worked on TB when I was at Glaxo Wellcome 25 years ago, most probably now, and that's how I got into TB. And I think the companies were very much working in TB at that stage. What came about, getting on for 10 years ago, that they the Gates Foundation starting off the TB drug accelerator, and I got back involved because people I had worked in TB were part of the TB drug accelerator and in the Gates Foundation and in the US. And then they asked whether we would start working on TB, and obviously yes, it's a big unmet need. But in that consortium, there are about 8 pharma companies, all contributing. None of them are looking to make a profit. They're all looking to develop drugs that can be donated to patients and not sold to make money. So yes, they're a bigger number now than there were 25 years ago. And they're making a massive contribution into that consortium in terms of time, intellectual input, compounds, running their own drug discovery programs, helping us to run our drug discovery program in terms of helping us to profile our molecules and understand liabilities, benefits in those programs. And they contribute at different levels, but they're all making major contributions to being able to move our compounds forward. And they're paying part of the EU consortium that we're part of in terms of taking drugs into early phase clinical development.
And also, so from the audience as well, so just, building upon what you've said there, both of you, what stage of the drug discovery process do you work on? So your TB portfolio might be quite a hard question actually to ask to keep it all in, but what stage of the drug discovery process do you work in?
So we are sort of start at the early stage, so finding new hits, new molecules that we think we can optimize to a better TB drug, and then we aim is to go right through to preclinical candidates. So this is the stage just before you do clinical trials. So we are not set up to do that later stage, but we are set up to go from finding something to work on right through to that preclinical selection phase. And at which point, if we had a candidate, we would look to partner with someone to do that late stage development, because we don't have the resource to do it in-house.
So somebody from the audience, I like this question. So they have said, how close are you and your collaborators to finding a new drug?
Oh, I get that question all the time. Actually, I mean, people think it should be solved within a year. But I mean, we do have two very exciting projects in Dundee that are at the really, really late stage, very close to that preclinical decision, so I mean, how long is a piece of string, but we are doing everything we can to get them over the line and to be able to get them evaluated in the late stage. At the same time, trying to bring in new projects, because as Paul talked about, there is quite a high dropout in successes in later stage TB drug discovery. So it's really important to just keep filling your own pipeline, and obviously other companies are doing the same. So hopefully we can get something.
Yeah, so within the TBDA, there are compounds that are in clinical development. There are compounds that are going through those stages to take them through to clinical development. But as Laura says, we've got two very exciting programs. One that is just going through early toxicology studies to be able to go to give us an idea whether we have something that can go into formal toxicology studies. And we've got another one where we're hoping to identify what is the kind of the molecule, the drug candidate that we can take into those studies to get into the clinical development phase. So, it's a very, very difficult disease to work on, and the guys in the team have done a brilliant job to get to where we are, especially as we're working with two new ways of tackling TB.
Yeah, no, I was going to say that is a credit to all of you, so all who's involved in the TB research and collaborators as well. So that's very well done to you all. So we've still got some more questions coming through, and I am aware of the time, so I'm going to try and get through them. It's great. I mean, yes, keep your questions coming. So there's a question I'm going to leave to the very end, because it's a very good last question one. So a question that somebody has asked is, how many drugs are in clinical trials to beat TB? Do you know of any of these values at all?
I mean, I was looking this up because I thought it's the kind of question I would get asked.
Yeah, it's the question.
So there's new drugs. There's also new combinations of old drugs that are being evaluated. So you have different phases. So some of the drugs that are being evaluated are better version of old drugs. So they work by the same mechanism, but they maybe don't have the side effects that Paul's talked about. So, I mean, I was counting about 12 different compounds yesterday when I was doing my research. So there are a number, but they do fall out for various reasons. If 1 in 6 only success, that's 2 compounds. So, they do exist, but mainly at the minute, I'd say that a large part of the portfolio is backup of current treatments.
So you've said as well about 1 in 6 will potentially make it. So this leads on to the next question. So if a medicine does make it into clinical trials, how likely is it to be sold to patients? So you've got not just the clinical trials, you've got the other bit that nobody likes to speak about.
Yeah, so a lot of TB drugs are given away for free. So the process is going through animal toxicology. Is it safe enough to at least give to patients? Then you give a very low level of drug to a patient, and then you increase it to see whether there aren't any toxicology issues to stop it being given to patients, and be able to give it with a sufficient dose difference between toxicology and efficacy. And then you have to go through and then show that it works in a sufficient number of patients. And as Laura was saying, then does it work in combination with other drugs to be able to get good enough efficacy, and as what we're hoping to do is give it for a shorter period of time. So generally in anti-infective space, it's possibly about 1 in 6 compounds get to the point where the regulatory authorities like the FDA in the US and the medical drug agencies in the UK, Europe and around the world will allow it to be given to patients. And then, depending on circumstances, whether it's sold or given away, that depends on the drug. But, anti-infectives about 1 in 6. Cancer, it may be about 1 in 30 drugs survive through to being registered to be able to be used in patients, in normal use. So it's low.
Yeah, no, very low. So we've got 3 questions left. So thank you, audience. We're going to try and get through these last 3. So one of them might be a little bit difficult because, from my understanding, it's not quite known. But what is the mode of action of how the lungs become infected? I'm not sure. I don't know the answer to this from TB. So what happens with the bacteria? How do the bacteria cause their effect to the lungs? I don't know if this question is known. This is somebody from the audience. Good question.
It is a good question. I'm not a clinician. I'm not going to offer an answer there.
I think you breathe the bacteria into your lungs. They replicate in the lining of the lung. They also they cause irritation. Your immune system tries to attack them. I think there is damage to the tissues in the lungs. They can grow in the cells in the lungs. Your body reacts and causes damage as well. So I'm not a clinician, but it's a combination of replicating bacteria, increase in fluid in your lungs, increase in inflammation in the lungs, and so it basically destroys your lungs if you're not treated.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You have, especially if you're immunocompromised.
Mm-hmm. So we've got another question as well. So 2 left, audience. So please do bear with me. I will get through your questions. So why is it not more prevalent in the UK? So it's mentioned that millions of cases in London. How were they diagnosed and treated?
Sorry, say that again. There's not millions of cases in London. There's 7,000 cases in London. I mean, those I think, if people have come to the UK from a country where they have TB, then that's where the TB is potentially coming from there, and then it might spread within their local community. I think it is better housing, better nutrition, access to drugs that's really got the big reduction, and also I think a campaign to inform people of how TB spread helped in the UK as well. So I think that's how they combated some of it.
Yeah,
it's not as transmissible something like COVID, and so I think you have to have that close contact in certain environments for it to spread.
So, guys, one of the finishing questions, actually there's two more, right? Okay, so we will get through these ones. So 2 questions. Thank you very much, audience. So, has bacterium developed resistance to TB drugs already developed? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so there are drugs over the years that have stopped being used because resistance has developed. Even if you give 4 drugs in combination, you get resistance to some of the drugs in that combination, and therefore their use is limited. And there's certainly some drugs that have been reduced in their use, some of them because they had toxic side effects as well. But yeah, even if you're giving 2 or 4 drugs, you get resistance to drugs, and we have there are bacteria out there. Again, statistics about 500,000 out of the 10 million cases last in 2020, I think it was, were cases of drug-resistant TB, and there have been cases of total drug-resistant TB where the TB is resistant to all of the drugs that we have currently to try and cure them. So yeah, there is a big problem of resistant bacteria out there, and that's why we have to keep turning the drugs over.
Yeah. So I was going to say, we have reached time. Thank you very much, audience, for all of your questions. Again, thank you very much, Laura and Paul, for giving up your time.
What was the killer question?
Oh, the killer question was...
I wanted to know.
Okay, we'll go through the killer question. Okay, what is the biggest challenge facing TB drug discovery?
TB.
Getting drugs into that TB is a challenge.
As Laura says, it's a very difficult organism to kill. To get the drug in, it can spit the drug out. It can close down the mechanisms for the drug to get in. And actually, what we're finding is that TB can actually metabolize, can break down the drug inside TB as well. And then it also can hide in the body. It can go dormant, so drugs that are reliant on the TB to replicate, to kill them, start working, and it ends up in these lesions in the lungs, sitting in the cottage cheese, which makes it hard to get the drug into it as well. And actually, the TB in that environment is very different from TB growing in a test tube, and it's a lot harder to kill. And a lot of drugs can't actually kill the TB in that environment. So I would say TB is the problem.
TB is the biggest challenge
thing to deal with. Yes.
Damn those bacteria.
Been around for a long time.
No, it's had a few. Well, you said since the age of the dinosaurs, so it's had quite a long time to evolve and become better at it than we are at trying to target it. But I do want to say, so thank you very much, Laura and Paul, for giving up your time today. Thank you very much, audience, for your fantastic questions. They were absolutely brilliant, and I hope that we've managed to inform you of just maybe perhaps some things you didn't know about TB research and what the Wellcome Centre are doing to combat it. And you did see him very briefly in the background, but he is there. Is Ali Floyd, our Public Engagement Officer. Thank you very much for doing the behind the scenes work and making sure that I keep, I'd say on time. Okay, I'm slightly over, but yeah, shit me, that's fine. But yes, so thank you very much, and thank you to the Wellcome Centre for funding this work. Thanks very much, everybody.
Okay,
Thank you.
Lauren.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye. Good night.